Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. For tonight's program, Is This the Starship Century? And now your host for this evening, co-producer of KPCC's science series, Next, People, Science, Tomorrow, Matt Kaplan.
Thank you, everyone. Now, what you folks at home who have just begun to watch the webcast don't know is that I already got one hand of applause from them, so I'm off to a really good start. But thank you, all of you around the world, for joining us for what I think is going to be an absolutely fascinating conversation this evening about the Starship Century, or I don't know, maybe it'll be the Starship Eon. We don't really know. That's one of the things that we'll talk about tonight, because there are some pretty significant challenges to overcome. Let me start with a story. And this is a story that goes back to my days of college radio down at KUCI, UC Irvine. My colleague, still my very good friend, some of you know him very well as the evening host, the host of All Things Considered here at KPCC. That's Nick Roman. He's standing right in the back there in the shadows. But hey, Nick. Nick was there. And it was back then I was a, dumb punk undergrad. In 1976, our guest on stage tonight, Greg Benford, had already been teaching on the campus for 5 years. But I decided with a friend of mine, Rich Rohan, we were going to apply for press credentials at JPL. And we were going to go up for the landing of Viking, the first, what would become the first successful soft landing on the Red Planet. So obviously the JPL public information people didn't check us out because they would have discovered KUCI was a 10-watt radio station. But so there we were, and it was absolute heaven. I found myself standing in Von Karman Auditorium in a small circle of people, and I'd already seen Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was there. Lou Friedman was there, with hair kind of like mine back then, an afro, long gone in my case. Lou Friedman, co-founder of the Planetary Society with Carl Sagan and Bruce Murray. He's right over here, by the way. And in this circle that I was standing in, more heroes, Ray Bradbury, Theodore Sturgeon. And I thought, I am the luckiest human being on earth, but I was going to get even luckier. Somebody comes running over to our circle and says, Heinlein's here, Robert Heinlein's here. Well, Heinlein introduced me, and I bet many of you, to the entire genre of science fiction, introduced me to interstellar travel. He brought up a lot of the things that we're going to talk about this evening, some of the technologies that may come up. Fusion torch ships in time for the stars, wormhole travel or something like that in The Door into Summer, and a multi-generation starship in his story Orphans of the Sky. So I'm thinking, he's up in the cafeteria. Do I dare go to this man who is like a god to me? Well, I did. I took my little cassette machine, went up to him. He was sitting with his wife and some friends, and I asked him, my voice quavering nervously, Mr. Heinlein, would you mind if I recorded a small conversation with you for this college radio station? And he said, why, certainly, no problem. Very polite. And I said, Mr. Heinlein, do you think that we will go to the stars? And he said, no, I don't think so. They're much too hot. But he said, now, if you're talking about the planets that are almost certainly circling those stars, then he said, yes, absolutely, that's part of our human destiny. So we're going to talk about that destiny 39 years later, when we seem to be in something maybe of a starship renaissance. Some of the finest minds on our pale blue dot are figuring out how to cross light years of space. One of them is going to be our onstage guest this evening, Dr. Gregory Benford. He conducts research in plasma turbulence and astrophysics at UC Irvine. Go Anteaters. He has published well over 100 papers, is a Woodrow Wilson Fellow and a visiting fellow at Cambridge University. Now, it's probably safe to say that most people know him better as one of the leading science fiction authors of our time. He's a winner of 2 Nebula and a roomful of other awards over his more than 20 novels that he has written. His 1980 book, Timescape, made a Heinlein-like impression on me. that, 33 years ago. Now, he and his physicist brother, James, who we'll also be talking with this evening, have assembled Starship Century. That's a good way to finish the show quickly. Eat the microphone. Starship Century, Toward the Grandest Horizon, which is Grandest Horizon, that's almost as good as Final Frontier, wouldn't you say? And this book, which is the basis of the conversation that we'll be having tonight, is in its turn based on another ongoing discussion, which will come up this evening. By the way, this book is available pretty much everywhere. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And Greg and Jim have decided that all the proceeds from this book will go into Starship or interstellar travel research. So with that, please help me welcome Gregory Benford to the stage. Welcome, Greg. So, why in the universe would we want to reach the stars?
Well, in this universe, it really matters because stars aren't immortal. And eventually, if humanity can persist for, let's say, 5 billion years, we're going to be needing another star. There are some other fixes to that, but actually, that's just a kind of dumb utilitarian answer. Because the stars are hanging there and beckoning to us is the short answer. I think we have the idea of going to the planets, fine, but the stars promise infinity because this universe is very big, getting bigger all the time. And there's so many prospective things that we could do out there and places to find to live. But there's an even better way to put it. You know, there are 3 varieties of chimpanzee. There's the ordinary chimp, the bonobo chimp. They still live in Africa. We're the chimp that got out of Africa because built into our bones is going over the horizon. And I think if you wondered if there's long-term any particular agenda or meaning to human action, it would be that our great drive is to expand human horizons in every sense of the word. Not just our capabilities, our arts, our sciences, our philosophies, but the literal horizon. And you may have noticed on this planet that we've run out of horizon. We've already been around this planet. And 500 years ago, that was big news. But now we can see other horizons, and here's what's different from Columbus. We can see our horizons. They're hanging there in the night sky, right outside this building, right now.
But there are a lot of horizons left in this solar system. Why cross those enormous gulfs that really at this point we are only beginning to guess at how we can do it?
Because it helps to play in the biggest field you can, I think. There's an example about this from human history, from American history, in fact, that goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. In 1812, he said, famous quotation, that it would take 1,000 years for the American frontier to reach the ocean. He was off an order of magnitude. In fact, even worse than that. The first locomotive had already moved on track in a commercial business in England in 1804. This was, after all, 8 years later. But he couldn't envision that distant place across the ocean would have produced already a technology that would, in 1869, complete the transcontinental railroad. And so you could take a train from the East Coast of the United States all the way to California in a bit more than half a century. Jefferson had no idea of such capabilities, but they were there already. He simply couldn't imagine the scale of human movement when you have an open frontier and there's a reason to go there. So we have that in our bones as Americans. The frontier has been a great metaphor. There's many theories about what it's done for the American culture. But the main point is you can't really guess the outlines of such vast territory until you've actually been there. If you look at the map from 1812, most of what we now call the United States was owned by places like Spain and France, even the Brits. Big, powerful European empires. Would they let us in? Well, it turned out we either bought it or we just took it away from them.
I don't want to have to deal with the Klingons that way, I'd have to say. Do you think then, continuing this comparison, this analogy, to the time of Jefferson, that we already have in embryonic form the technologies that might be able to get us, or at least our robots, to the stars?
I believe we do, certainly for our robots. At the moment, the most probable, it seems to me and my brother Jim, method of getting a pioneering craft into the vicinity of a nearby star, and we'll talk a little later, I guess, about how close is the nearby star, because we actually don't know. Because using lightweight devices called sails, remember solar sailing? You sail around on sunlight. In 2015, NASA is going to fly the first sail, manufactured by Lagarde Corporation down in Irvine, as a matter of fact, to beyond the L1 point to use as a warning beacon of approaching solar storms. And they're going to do it using a sail which is about 35 meters across. And that's a practical use for a very, very lightweight device that weighs in the range of 100 kilograms. That is, weighs as much as a human being. So that's actually going to happen. But if you take sails and then fly them very close to the sun and then expose them to the sun and get a big boost out, people like Lou Friedman and many others have shown that you can get very, very high velocities leaving the solar system. So you could send sailcraft out to explore the far regions beyond where Voyager is now. And you could do it fairly soon, on a scale of a decade or two. And, time times velocity equals distance, as we have learned with Voyager. If you start launching fairly fast craft now, on a scale of a century, you can plausibly explore what's in our near neighborhood and maybe even get to Alpha Centauri on a scale of a century. After all, Jefferson thought it would take 10 centuries to reach the Pacific, and there could be improvements to come.
So is this evidence that statement I made? Did I misspeak when I said that we may be experiencing a renaissance in thought about travel to the stars? I guess to have a renaissance, you have to have had an earlier golden era, and I'm not sure we've had that yet.
Well, remember, before the Renaissance, there was a dark age.
Yes.
At least for the Europeans. We're getting increased interest in all of these problems and the prospect of the human use and even occupation of the night sky, shall we call it, for two reasons. One is we're beginning to realize that our technology is getting very good, and things like artificial intelligences may make it possible to make craft that could go to other stars and report back, and you wouldn't have to go to the problems of sending humans. That's one thing. But the other is the coming industrialization of space. In a few years, there's going to be, at the hands of Mr. Bigelow, an orbital hotel.
This is Robert Bigelow of
Yes.
Bigelow Aerospace?
Right. He's building it right down there by LAX. And also there's Planetary Resources, another company based in the LA area, which plans on mining asteroids. And at the beginning, doing some prospecting, learning things about the whole big solar system. There are several industries that you can think of that have an obvious role and a real economic payoff, and that are within the reach of this generation. I would add to that, for example, do you know that there are hundreds of billions of dollars of wasted assets in geosynchronous orbit? They are communication satellites. They went up there, and the solar panels failed, or they had single point or double point failures, and they're out of action, and they cost $5 billion a piece. Well, if you can go up and fix those, you can enormously enhance the use of those assets, which already exist. You're just bringing them back online. So there's a repair function to be done in orbit too. So there are all these things, and they simply require that we reach further out into the solar system with greater capability. And it doesn't take too much imagination to see that that's a stepping stone to the stars, too. Here's another historical analogy. You know, after Robert Byrd reached the North Pole and South and all that early 20th century exploration, how many people went to Antarctica? Answer, nobody. Nobody went until after the Second World War. How come? Because the Second World War produced all the methods, really robust airplanes and naval vessels and so forth, that made it possible to go there again without great risk. If you let the technology develop, suddenly there's a whole new continent you can reach that everybody had actually forgotten about. Went about half a century with nobody visiting it. That kind of thing will happen in the solar system. You will get new technologies, such as the nuclear thermal rocket, and bingo, you got a new game.
And we'll talk about some others of these technologies. I do want to mention, you mentioned planetary resources by LAX. I bet you meant SpaceX, that little complex Elon Musk means. Planetary resources is up in the Northwest, right?
Well, some of it is, but some of it's down here.
Is
too.
it? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. But I was going to mention Elon Musk because here's the guy who sees a strong future for humanity out there, and he intends to make a profit getting us there.
Yes, and getting us to Mars, for example.
Yeah.
I'm saving up for my ticket.
I'll put away a few bucks for that. We're going to get to talking about the book, and we want to bring out your brother Jim as well. But before we do that, is there a brief little primer to interstellar travel that you can give us? I think you've brought some slides along.
Oh, yes, right. Can we go forward? The next slide, for those of you in the audience, shows you who's in the book. And we have a lot of notable people. People like Sir Martin Rees, who was the head of the Royal Astronomical Society. Neil Stephenson, a nice novella about his keen idea, which is to build a 20-kilometer high tower, which could have very, very many interesting uses. We could go into that. We have Steve Baxter and Freeman Dyson. All these people, well, many of these people showed up at the Starship Century Symposium at UC San Diego, the first event put on by the Arthur C. Clarke Center in May. And by the way, if you go to starshipcentury.com, it's one word, Starship Century, you can see the videos from that 2-day symposium with a lot of brilliant talks. And you can also, by the way, buy the book direct on a link at a higher profit margin than if you go to Amazon. So, and remember, the money we make out of the book, my brother and I are going to devote to research. We'll give out grants. You want to do the next slide?
And do you want to do it? He's going to.
Okay.
Dave over there is going to take care of it for us.
For the audience, this is a map of the United States in 1812. You don't typically see this in high school textbooks, but notice that until we got the Louisiana Territory, the big holders in North America, or at least the United Territorial, what's now the U.S., were Spain and France. Our colonies were just clustered over there on the eastern seaboard, and that's why Jefferson thought it was going to take a long time to get to the Pacific. And first, he had no idea what was out there. That's why he sent Lewis and Clark. Next. And here's that locomotive, 1804. That was the first commercial railroad train, right? And it existed, and Jefferson knew about it. He'd read about it in the London Times. It didn't occur to him that it would make a difference. Next. That this would happen in 1869, that the Transcontinental Railroad would show up and all these people would gather around, and you'll notice that these are much better locomotives than the one you saw in 1804. That's the point. The technology improves. Now, next, there are going to be mistakes. This is a picture of a locomotive overshooting the Gare du Nord in Paris about 20 years after that last slide. So you see, what do they say? Mistakes were made. Yes. Next. But if I had to say what's going to be important in the next century, the big technologies that will make a huge difference are nuclear rockets, nuclear thermal rockets, which, by the way, the United States has already developed and are sitting in mothballs in Nevada. They were never flown. Space robotics, because mostly you don't want to do all those jobs out there yourself. We're clumsy and we need oxygen and retirement plans and things like that. And 3D printers. That's a new technology just on the horizon. People are printing little things out of them, but there's no reason you can't print all kinds of things out of 3D printing. It's accelerating at an incredible pace. Those are a minimum of what we could use to really use the solar system. For what? Well, okay, exploration is nice. Columbus, but I would remind you, didn't go to the New World to explore. He went there looking for China, and it was to make money. I like making money. It's really a lot better than not making money. And so if you look at the industrial capabilities available, that will tell you what infrastructure you will build. Next. But here's a little warning sign that's in the Starship Century, the book. It's in a short story, actually. It's a sign that's on the wall of a starship, and it says, here are all the various ways you can die very quickly. And they are things like an air leak, fire, radiation, low gravity, bad food, carbon dioxide, low oxygen, and there are others too. And the story is about all the many things that can go wrong when you're trying to run in a biosphere that you have to be responsible for, unlike the one we live in here where it's been created by natural selection. So space ain't going to be easy. But then the Western United States wasn't easy either. Remember, we got an entire genre out of the Western. It's called the Western. I can't think of another society that did a thing like that. I mean, I always wonder why the Siberians didn't produce Easterns. What happened? It's a big, raw, primitive place, which, by the way, still hasn't been much developed. Next. This is a landscape that shows you the three primary horizons in the human experience. First, there's the horizon of the Earth, the skyline. Second, that thing that's almost vertical from the horizon is the zodiac. That's sunlight reflecting off dust in the plane of the ecliptic. And of course, that big arched band is the plane of the galaxy. So you see there the three basic human horizons in one shot. And the one in the middle, the zodiac, is the next step, but it leads inevitably to the plane of the galaxy. Next. Here's the issue about the stars. How near is the nearest star? The correct answer is we don't know, because we haven't completed the inventory of brown dwarfs in our neighborhood. There was, just a short while ago, a brown dwarf discovered only about 6 light years away. We didn't even know it was there. And we're not through with that. Based naively on an estimate of the density of brown dwarf stars, stars that are bigger than Jupiter, but sort of lukewarm as stars go, then there, by the odds, should be a brown dwarf closer than Alpha Centauri.
In fact, you devote your fictional contribution to this book in part to that scenario.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's a kind of it's called the man who sold the stars.
Does anybody get the little intrinsic tribute to Robert Heinlein, man who sold the moon?
Well, the stars are the next thing to sell. Sell it as a destination. Make it seem worthwhile. And it follows his career through 100 years. You see, because he actually lives more than 100 years, because, in fact, the mean lifespan of Americans has increased by 50% a century for 2 centuries in a row. The mean lifespan at the time of Jefferson was less than 50. In fact, it was around 40. So he lives a long time, and he ends up going to a brown dwarf that's even closer than Alpha Centauri. Next. And this is that star, by the way. This is what a brown dwarf would look like, or at least what the astronomers think it looks like. It looks a lot like Jupiter, but with strange colors, because it's a big fat thing like a gas giant, but it's radiating a fair amount of energy, mostly in the infrared. But we now know that it's possible to have habitable worlds around such a star. They just have to hug close to the fire. And since the brown dwarfs appear to be a majority of all the stars in the galaxy, there's a fair chance that life may have developed around a brown dwarf somewhere. We've been a lucky species so far. I mean, after all, it was only a few 100,000 years ago. We were, what is that famous shot in 2001? Tossing bones at the sky. We've come a long way. We may get to see worlds like this. Next. But this is a plot showing you that indeed there is this little this little star out there. It was discovered this year. Didn't make the front page of the New York Times. I don't know why, but here's the next nearest star discovered. And we never knew it was there before. Next. And this is a plot of how fast you have to go to the stars. And I won't go into great detail except to say that there are natural objects that move at speeds they're like 1,000 kilometers a second. The Earth moves around the sun at maybe 30 kilometers a second. The moon around the Earth, maybe 3 kilometers a second. But you have to go hundreds of thousands of kilometers a second to be in the game of getting close to the speed of light and to cut the travel time to Alpha Centauri. It's like an old story of a rich man who was talking to his gardener, and he said, well, I'd like to have one of those big oak trees. How long do they take to grow? And he said, well, it's going to take you at least a century, my lord, or maybe 2 centuries. He said, well, in that case, there's no time to waste. If you launch now, you can let time do the work for you, just as we so luckily did with Voyager. And I can remember I was in that era, I'm that old, that no one really thought it would get into interstellar space. In fact, it was not even mentioned. I mean, we thought it was going to be a big deal to go to the outer planets, and it was. Our horizons have expanded yet again. Next. This is just a quick set of visions of all kinds of starships. There are photon starships that people have envisioned because you combine matter and antimatter. I don't know how that's going to work physically. I am a physicist, but here's a picture of one in case we get to make it. Next. This is Alan Steele's spacecraft from his Coyote series, which is as I recall, it's a fusion craft. Fusion is a good prospect. Next. And this is a beamed sail. Now, for picturesque purposes, we have shown the beam, although microwave beams and laser beams in space don't show up as a beam because there's nothing to scatter them, but here it's illustrated, and it's illuminating this sail, which we're pushing out toward the stars.
And can I say, that sail looks an awful lot like Cosmos 1.
Yes.
I'm going to plug the Planetary Society a bit here because otherwise my other boss, Bill Nye, and my former boss, Lou Friedman, won't forgive me. But that was the design that the Society tried to put up on a Russian rocket. Didn't do so well, but it was the rocket that failed. We've moved on now to Light Sail 1, which, so the effort continues. Hopefully we'll beat Lagarde with that one.
That's right. That's the planetary sail. And yes, my brother and I worked on it with you guys too, and it was sad not to see it fly. Next, here is an advanced version by Adrian Mann of an interstellar sail being hit by a beam. Again, we illuminate it because, well, there are some technical reasons why you can see the beam at all. But notice that this beam is driving a very large scale because the little hole in the middle of this sail is 4 kilometers across. So this is a big sail. And the bigger the sail, the bigger the payload. So it's envisioning what would you do, and this is unmanned, this is robotic, if you wanted to drive something toward, let's say, a brown dwarf that we discover next year. And this kind of craft is the one that we know we have done the basic physics for. And so we could build it. It's not going to be cheap, but we could hit it with a beam of laser or microwaves, and we could accelerate it and send that expedition so that a few generations from now, we would be getting information back from that interstellar system. Next. So, of course, there are other reasons to go into space. This is a picture of Stephen Hawking in 0G. He said he felt the best he had felt in decades. And you can see he's smiling. So, I mean, tourism is a reason to go into space. Most people don't know that tourism began in the United States only a couple of decades after the beginning of the United States. In fact, before that, Englishmen were coming over to see what these rubes were all about and maybe make a few bucks.
And I don't think you mentioned that the very first essay in Starship Century is by Dr. Stephen Hawking.
That's right. It's a short essay saying, why should we do this? Because it's an evolutionary imperative and it's good life insurance for the species. It's a very short piece, but it's very true. And I've known Stephen since the 1970s when I was a fellow at Cambridge. He really does believe this. When he was going to high school in England, the only thing he would read is science fiction. He just faked his way through his English classes, he told me. He is a good writer. Next. What is next? Oh, yes. Well, this is a comic strip that shows somebody saying, look, there are all these great prospects. We could go to the stars. And somebody else says, can I get some more sleep now? Because most people don't care about these prospects. That's true. Most Europeans stayed in Europe. They didn't go to the New World, and they didn't found a new society, and they didn't create a new kind of society. That's the way the species works. Basically, you have a lot of people at the middle who don't move very much, who don't change very much. Progress is always due to some small percentage, and people like us have the perhaps sometimes happy and sometimes unhappy task of trying to do new things. Next. And so the last panel shows Voyager meeting an alien spacecraft, and the legend is, be prepared. That is to say, it's all strange out there. It's the whole rest of the universe. We know very little about it except what the astronomers tell us. Look at Voyager and the perimeter of interstellar space. When it was launched, people thought that perimeter was somewhere a bit beyond Pluto, maybe even before Pluto, maybe around Neptune. I mean, there were serious scientific reasons to believe that. Completely wrong. Turned out to be 3 times further away than those estimates. We think we know more than we do know. So we should be prepared for surprises. And some of those surprises on the interstellar scale may be very good.
We have kept a certain partner of yours, a partner since birth, waiting in front of his webcam for a while. So I think we better get to him.
We were womb mates.
James Benford is president of Microwave Sciences. He wrote the book on high-power microwaves. It's the textbook that is now in its 2nd edition. He has written many, many other papers. He has also a background in some years ago writing about science fiction. And he and his brother here on stage did some pioneering work on one of the propulsion techniques that we just talked about, microwave propulsion. Please welcome to next, via Skype, James Benford.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Hello, everyone.
You can blame Greg if it took longer to get to than we thought, but those were pretty good slides.
Story of my life. I want to point out there's actually a third Benford here, and that is just to the right-hand side of the audience in the first row, my son Dominic. Raise your
I
hand.
didn't know that. Dominic, raise your hand. There he is, off to the side there. Welcome.
He's an astrophysicist at NASA. Happens to be visiting JPL this week.
Terrific. Well, welcome. The next generation of Benfords.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything? I bet you had some thoughts as Greg was taking us through those slides.
Well, indeed. Let's go back to the beginning, the book. Hold up the book, Matt.
I will hold up the book.
The principal goal we had for this book, Starship Century, was to collect the visions of interstellar thinking across the spectrum from the physical, biological sciences and other technical areas such as engineering, as well as the social, political, and humanistic perspectives. So that's why it consists of a collection not only of articles about the possibilities for interstellar travel, both technical and societal, but it contains science fiction and even some poetry. The second objective of the book was to fund interstellar research from the proceeds of the sales of the book, and therefore we wanted to make a book that would be widely read. That is, to communicate the perspective of 2013 about starships in what we think is the beginning of this century's push to produce starships. And frankly, we wanted to have a book that would be widely read so that we could sell a lot of books and so we could fund a lot of research. So to capture the largest fraction of the book revenue for research, please order the book from our dedicated website, which is starshipcentury.com.
And as you heard, that is a great way to get it. I will tell you, because I feel obligated, that it is available from other sources. But this is where I suppose the proceeds will go the farthest toward reaching these goals that we're talking about. I will also give it this plug, gentlemen. I enjoyed it enormously. It is a wonderful collection of both essays and science fiction tales. And some of the stuff in here that I hope we can talk about is really mind-blowing. One concept I have in particular that we will absolutely get to before the end of the evening, so there's a little bit of a tease for you. How did the book come about? I mean, this was all based on a gathering, right? I think, Greg, you alluded to it for a moment.
Well, it's based on, in a way, on two. First, there was the 100-year Starship event in 2011, sponsored by DARPA. And that brought together several hundred people to talk about all this, and it was the first time there'd ever been a real significant meeting about what could be a goal a century from now. What could we aim for? Could we, reach the Pacific, if you're Thomas Jefferson, or could we perhaps a century from now launch a starship that would really explore nearby stars? Well, we don't know if we can, but we do know we won't know if you don't try. And so this looked at first at how you develop an interplanetary economy, so you have technologies and resources to make this possible, such as the railroad train for North America. And the other is, what's the ambition going to be about? I mean, what are the essential challenges? As Jim said, it's not just propulsion. It's not even just maintaining a biosphere. It can be things such as Paul Davies' article, which says, basically, if you get to an alien planet, how do you know you can live there at all? I mean, we know nothing about intersecting another biosphere. What about the microbes? Is it better to go to a completely sterile planet and start from scratch? Well, we don't know how to do that either, do we?
I think of the Martians in War of the Worlds who
Yes.
all caught colds and died.
No, right. So those are enormous issues. You'll notice that many of them will be encountered in the exploration of the solar system. You're going to have to go there and live in some environment and have a closed biosphere. NASA has yet to actually have a closed biosphere that runs for a long time, that really is closed, has no resources from the outside. So we've got lots to do.
Jim, there is an amazing spectrum of starships illustrated in the book. They range from these wispy sails, Greg showed us an example of one of those, to one that was, at least in the drawings that have been done, 60,000 meters, or between 11 and 12 miles long. Some of them are designed to carry hundreds or thousands of human travelers. Others are entirely robotic. Some are driven by H-bombs. Some have no engines at all, the sails that are driven from other external sources of energy. I mean, what does this range of approaches say about the status of the thinking about how close we are to figuring out how to do this?
It reflects the fact that the problem is very, very hard. It's extremely hard to do, so we have to really stretch the boundaries of explanations. Let me give you a concrete example. If you, Matt, were the Earth, and the far corner of the room you were in was the moon, if that's the scale of distance, where is Alpha Centauri? If you go outside, you can see it. It's the moon itself. That's the scale of the stars. It is, we called it toward the grandest horizon because it is a far larger challenge. Now, let me remind you that President Kennedy said, we go to the moon and other things because they are hard. And starships are really hard. Therefore, you need enormous, not only is the scale enormous, but the fact that we have people and our instrumentalities, machines that have a certain lifetime, we have to think about doing that in something that's not the 100,000 years we've been around, but not 1,000 years of the civilization, but perhaps not 100 years. How about a few decades? That's what we'd like to think about. Think of it this way. Alpha Centauri is roughly 4 light years away. At a tenth the speed of light, that's 40 years. The longest voyage that's ever been made on this planet, a sailing voyage, of course, was 3 years to Australia in the 17th century. The the fact is, it's so hard to do, and the energies required are so enormous that we have to look at a very broad spectrum of possibilities. There's no question that the energies are so great that I think it follows as the night to day that there must be a lowering of mass. We must go, in my personal view, to very low mass starships, such as on the order of a few tons, not a few 100,000 tons, the way the nuclear rockets would have to be.
Greg?
Well, of course, I agree with everything Jim just said, because it's right. But it's important to realize that if we send artificial intelligences, the dimension of the problem, in a way, is easier because you're not involving humans, tricky, pesky humans, with retirement programs. And therefore, you can really think over long periods of time because you can keep an artificial intelligence alive for quite a long while. Voyager's still working, and it was running off, 10K of memory or something like that? That is one of those other dimensions that says humanity, after all, has explored most of the solar system, not in person, but it has expanded our worldview enormously. And in 2 years, a spacecraft called, tellingly, New Horizons, speeds by Pluto. The last, maybe planet, maybe not, depends on who you talk to. And then it takes off for parts unknown. And by the way, the nuclear power source aboard will last for decades. It's going to last longer than Voyager. And therefore, it may well be that we'll be getting signals from New Horizons a century from now, or even 2 centuries. It's a different kind of nuclear plutonium, I think 239 or 238 source.
I think 239,
239,
I think. Lou, do you
yeah.
remember? In those radiothermal generators? 238, thank you.
Okay.
Not the stuff you can make bombs out of, folks.
Yeah. My license plate is, by the way, is plutonium 239. 238 was taken. Close enough for government work. So those kinds of things, we have to keep in mind that our capabilities will be greater in a century. And we may be able to do things, even leaving out the really bizarre things, that we wouldn't think of now. Stephen Baxter has a really good story about talking to the AI on a starship, a very light craft, I think it's a sailcraft, that's on its way, and it has to talk because it's a social being, right? You can't just put an intelligence in a box and leave it there for a century and think it's going to be sane when you open the box again. So it wants to talk to people, and this is about a conversation it has. Yeah. And a boy who talks to it very early, and toward the end of the stories, he's an old man, and the AI still wants to talk to him. That stretches human horizons in a way we haven't really thought of before.
Gentlemen, even though all of you, and both of you and others who are in the audience agree that it looks like it's going to be our robotic emissaries, I don't want to ignore a major theme of the book, which is humans going to the stars. Somebody who wrote one of the stories about that kind of a voyage is David Brin.
Yeah.
I have a surprise for you. David, are you with us?
I am indeed. Are both Benfords there?
Yes, they are both here, and they can both hear you, and I hope they're suitably surprised to hear your voice.
Well, you know, they're identical twins, but one of them is so much better looking than the other.
David Brin, ladies and gentlemen, another award-winning, top-of-the-field science fiction author and a scientist in his own right, another member of the UC San Diego Science and Science Fiction Mafia, as Greg and Jim are. So please welcome David Brin, who's going to join us for just a few minutes. And David, I want to welcome you back to Next because you were a previous guest on another episode in this series of live events. Let me ask you, David, about the story that you wrote. What is it, The Heavy Generation? Here's my first question. Were you high when you wrote this? You've got colored hands extruding out of the walls of your starship, helping people out and talking to the human crew of the ship?
Well, it was inspired by the thing that people were saying to each other 10 years ago, talk to the hand. and so, one of the fun things that you get to do in science fiction that you don't get to do in science is, in both cases you get to say what if, but in science fiction you get to say, well, let's play with this a little farther. In the Heavy Generation, I took one of the oldest types of starships around that obey Einstein. And when people understood Einstein said there was a speed limit, our visions of starships went in several directions. One is, how could we cheat Einstein and still kiss our loved one in the morning and come back for dinner? And that's Star Trek, Warp Drive, Star Wars. And that hasn't been totally excluded, though it seems unlikely. One of the oldest is the Generation ship. And that's where human beings make the space colonies that we think we might in Earth orbit, mining asteroids. This is the exciting new adventure that NASA is engaged in, and some private companies that may make us super rich by mining asteroids. Well, while we're out there, we'll hollow out some asteroids, spin them up, and have habitats, and they'll get bigger and bigger. People will get used to living in them, and eventually they'll put engines on them and go at a modest pace between the stars. And what you then have is what's called the Generation ship. People living in comfort, getting old, dying, and their great-grandchildren being technological, trained. They are the ones who pilot the ship into orbit around a new star. And if there's a convenient planet there, they then plant a heavy generation. And these are the kids who have to grow up in the outer spun areas of the ship in order to grow up heavy duty, like the thick bones that you and I have, who can stand a planetary surface. And they're the generation that's sent down to the surface to start a new colony. And then, with great relief, the ship then moves on to its next destination. And I deal in this volume with some of the ironies, tragedies, and strange plot reversals that might come in such a situation. But the main thing is this book is about lots of different types of starships. And in my novel Existence, I go full bore with the one where the starships we send out there are manned by humans, but those humans are AIs and robots who were raised to think of themselves as humans, or people who transformed themselves into a way of life that can stand travel between the stars better than organic.
And that's really the theme that I was taken with in the story, because this was, it seemed to me, was about humans remaking themselves for space in one case, and then also for the environment of this new homeworld that they were going to try and make a civilization on.
Yeah, we're going to have to learn that it's not going to be as in Star Wars and Star Trek, where just Earth humans can land on beautiful Earth-like planets and immediately start having babies and all that. If we're really lucky, we'll find some planets out there when we do go interstellar that need a minimum of terraforming, or even better, because there will probably already be life there, and terraforming is a crime against whatever life is there, that we would adapt. And the humans we plant there, for instance, will probably need a different, at minimum, to be used to a different mix of carbon dioxide than humans on Earth are used to.
Greg and Jim, any comments about what David brought to the book?
Well, his point is quite cogent, because indeed one of the implicit themes in the book is that the new horizon we confront may be ourselves, that we are horizon too. It's worth remembering that people 5,000 years ago would find almost everything about us unintelligible. I mean, look at these strange things we wear on our faces, these artificial eyes.
And it's not even Google Glass.
Yeah, I mean, that we continually transform ourselves, and that will not stop. In fact, it will probably accelerate.
I'd like to say that there are several possibilities out there in the stars. The two that are interesting to us is we find planets in habitable zones, and they fall into two classes. Those that don't apparently have any life, that is, they don't have any, we can't detect any chemistry out of equilibrium, and those that do have a chemistry out of equilibrium and may have some form of life. Both cases are interesting. The first case you can colonize without fear because they could have the available landmass and oceans, and yet life didn't originate there. That's probably a reasonable thing to happen because life is not a certainty. And if life didn't exist, the other class of planets, then we would go to observe them because we'd see another ecosystem, perhaps, hopefully, another civilization. So all the cases you can think of for planets in habitable zones are going to be interesting to us, and therefore, ultimately, we're going to either go to colonize them or to study them, and I think you can do a lot robotically, but as we're finding ultimately on Mars, after a while, you've got to move beyond robots, and you've got to send people.
David Brin, you were in very good company in this book, Starship Century. Not the first time for you. Why do you care so deeply about this stage of human development, interstellar travel?
Well, there are several aspects. Elon Musk, for instance, is highly motivated to give us Tesla cars and SpaceX new forms of rockets. And he told me that his biggest motivation was to create a situation in which humans are in several places in the solar system so that we don't have all our eggs in one basket, and so that we can survive. If something goes wrong with the Earth, then there will be people in space colonies who can come and help the Earth. If the space colony people are on Mars get into trouble, Earth can help them. And that certainly makes a lot of sense. Personally, I go a little bit more with Kim Stanley Robinson, one of our colleagues and a great science fiction author who wrote about colonization of Mars. And he says that we are really creatures of Earth, and until we make robot copies of ourselves or transform ourselves in different ways, for instance, as Greg depicted in one of his stories, transforming ourselves to live under the ice of Europa, until that day comes, we're creatures of the Earth. So what's our biggest reason to head outward? Our biggest reason to head outward is because if our eyes are on a distant horizon, then the problems that are in front of us look smaller, and we quickly and irritably solve them in order to move onward. And this is what we did in the Apollo era. I think that one of the problems of America today is we are so grouchy and so obsessed with the dogmas and little fights that have been fomented on us by cable news that we've forgotten that we're solving a lot of things really fast, and we could simply lift our gaze and become ambitious again. And that ambition in its own right is going to make us able to solve all the things between us and there. That's my biggest reason for wanting to be a people who have starships on their agenda. It doesn't have to be a huge portion of our budget. But the interesting thing is 3 different government agencies and several billionaires, all at the same time, have decided that starships are acceptable for us to at least start talking about. And I think that's a sign of sanity amid all the insanity of culture war.
David, I'm going to let you go, but not before I mention, I think the book that you were talking about when you talked about AIs, artificial intelligences who believe that they are living beings because they once were. And that's your monumental novel, Existence, which I enjoyed enormously and highly recommend. And I just want to thank you very much for this surprise reappearance on Next.
And you guys are in good hands with the Benford boys. And let's all be ambitious and head out there. Good luck to you all.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. David Brin.
Are you sure that wasn't an AI, actually?
An AI? That probably was an AI living in a ruby crystal that came from somewhere else in the universe.
There's no way to know.
David talked about these challenges, and so did you, Greg, about that are more than technological. What do you say to people who say, and there's good reason to say it, that no nation, no group of nations is ever going to want to take on a project of the kind of scale that we're talking about here?
But, a colleague said to me recently about exactly this book, Starship Century. He said, I can't imagine us really doing this. And I said, I hope you realize that lack of imagination is not actually an argument.
That's great. Jim, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'd say when people talk about us, they usually mean the governments. And right now, the point of the spear in space is not governments. It's private. And I suspect that as the solar system develops, it's going to continue to be that way, to the consternation of many aspects of the political arena. The fact is there are 5 serious interstellar organizations in existence now. Only 3 years ago, there was only one. They are all private institutions. They are all privately funded. There is nothing to speak of in government funding for it. And I don't think that it would fare well in a Congress of any country or a legislature or a parliament these days to say, let's go spend money on the stars when they don't even know how to balance their budget, not even close to it. So I think the private sector leads here, and that actually is they're not constrained the way SETI was by being funded by federal government and then cut off because of limited point of view. Thinking long term isn't something that politicians do. Thinking long term is something that, ironically, happens when you get older. Last week, I was at an event like this at the Long Now Foundation in San Francisco, a wonderful event where one of our contributors to the book, Peter Schwartz, gave a terrific talk, and you can see it online at the Long Now Foundation, about the interstellar perspective and why he thinks starships are essentially inevitable in the long term. Thinking long term isn't something that governments do anymore. And in fact, the Apollo program was a short-term program. It said by the end of this decade, and he meant it. And they took it to be in '69. They could have taken it to be in 1970. But I think this is an opportunity for those of us in the private sector. I'm a totally private sector person, to this opportunity and think long term and do research that's oriented toward the possibility that by the end of this century, we will launch the first true interstellar starships at velocities of approximately 1/10 or greater of the speed of light. I should point out that from the beginning of when we could walk at a few miles an hour to the return of Apollo from the moon was a factor of 10,000 in speed. We need another 10,000 factor to build starships. That shows you the magnitude of the challenge. And that's why near-term solutions won't work. We have to think about things outside the box, outside the boundary of rockets, probably. I think rockets don't really scale well, as we all know from the rocket equation. In fact, sail ships or beam-driven sails are the only method we can think of right now that actually has physics and engineering seeming to be possible. And the next question, of course, is economics. Go to fusion. And fusion is profoundly difficult. We don't really know how to do that yet in the physics sense. And we certainly don't know it in the engineering sense. And the cost we cannot imagine. So I think there are a lot of candidates, and what the interstellar organizations are trying to do is look at this in a broad spectrum. They have a series of projects. You mentioned Icarus Interstellar, the umbrella organization that has a number of projects underway to look at the methods of getting to the stars. And we will have competitions. We have a competition right now in the Icarus project to find what's the best way to follow Daedalus, the starship that was designed in 1978.
Which we have right above our heads here, Jim.
Yes, and to make a 21st century Daedalus. I pointed out a year or two ago that the experiments, which I used to do on electron beam fusion, showed that Daedalus would never have worked, but that was in the 20th century. The fact that fusion can be something we should certainly push forward on. But the interstellar organizations, entirely private, are pushing ahead on these ideas. And I think that that's a great invigorating factor. We have a competition among organizations to find the best way to go to the stars. And we are trying to find ways of funding these efforts, and that's why we did this book. End of soliloquy.
I want to talk about the technology that the two of you have actually proven to some degree. And then, before we finish, some of the more exotic considerations in this book, which are quite fascinating, although way, way out there. I do want to mention to the folks who are here with us in the Crawford Family Forum, where we are in the midst of our next discussion of the Starship Century with Greg and James Benford, that folks, we're going to open this up to you for your questions in a few minutes. Please keep those very short, very succinct. What you'll need to do when I call out for those is raise your hand. Somebody will run over to you with a microphone, and they will kindly hold it for you. The service here is absolutely outstanding. And please ask it very briefly, and then we'll throw it up here to Gregory and James. So, in the book is a series of images that shows essentially a sail being levitated by microwaves. And that's something that you guys pulled off.
Yeah, and you can see it because the sail lights up the chamber because it's over 2,000 degrees. It's a carbon fiber sail that we lifted against gravity using about 10 kilowatts of microwaves. And
5
kilowatts, okay.
And
it's a kilowatt per square centimeter of sail.
Yeah, we didn't expect this because what really lifted it was not just the photon pressure, though it was considerable, but rather inside the carbon fibers, there was carbon monoxide that had been generated during the making of those fibers. And at a certain temperature, it liberated from the lattice, bam, just like a rocket, all this hot gas came out of the bottom, and it accelerated it up at several Gs. And then we couldn't see it anymore. And we wondered where it was. We had to crack the vessel open. It was, of course, operating in a vacuum. And there it was, stuck to the ceiling. The first time anyone had ever done that. And the point is, it points out another mechanism. You can push them with photons, but if you can heat up a substance on the surface, you can make them become involuntary rockets. And if you do that, as Lou Friedman and others have thought of, in a maneuver called the sun diver, a term, by the way, that I invented for David Brin long ago, decades, 30 years ago.
He wrote a very good novel.
Yeah, first novel. He said, you need a better. I said, you need a better title, kid. That you're close to the sun and you get the rocket effect. You can really get high velocities, thousands of kilometers a second, maybe even. So we did all that, by the way, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Jim, that technology, you think it's pretty scalable up to interstellar craft?
It's entirely scalable. I think in terms of the 3 gates you have to go through to demonstrate a technology's utility. First, the physics has to be, in the case of sails, that we've done that. It's done. Secondly, the engineering of how do you build large structures, how do you build large radiating beams, how do you build sails? That's something we can see how to do because you can make it modular. And we already know how to build modular transmitters of large size, such as in the case of various defense systems such as Aegis. That's a known technology, and it can be extrapolated. The third question is, how much does it cost? Which most approaches to interstellar can't even ask that question. And we can do that. I've figured it out, and it costs on the order of the same kind of large things like a colony on the moon or an expedition to Mars. It's on that scale. $100 billion in today's, but of course you stretch it out over time. The key thing is for beams is you have to think about it in a different way. It's like a railroad. You build a railroad, then you can put lots of locomotives down it. But the key thing is you got to have the road. Beamer that can drive a sail to high velocities.
Yeah, you cut out there. I want to make sure people know, because there was a little drop out there. You said the beamer. The beamer in this case is the locomotive.
No, the beamer is the track.
Oh, the track.
It's the track.
Sorry, that's the infrastructure.
Yeah. The beamer is the infrastructure. It is an electromagnetic source, such as a large laser, a large microwave source, that drives the sail. When the sail is gone, you drive another sail, and you drive another sail. So it's like the rails of the locomotive. And the locomotive is the sail, which is relatively cheap compared to the beamer. And so once you paid the infrastructure cost of building the rail, building the beamer, then you can send lots of sails because there are lots of stars.
Yeah. And one way to think about it is sails are light and fast because you leave the engine on the ground.
Just very briefly, why microwaves? Why not lasers? I mean, you guys have done your work with microwave.
Yes. The fact is, my current analysis is that it doesn't matter what the frequency is because the factors cancel out. The reason we did it with microwaves is microwaves are a lot cheaper than lasers.
Yeah.
Now, not that lasers aren't actually more focusable and give you a tighter beam. That's true, but the apertures cost a lot, and the advantage of lasers cancels out to first order.
Yeah.
So you're basically stuck with the question, what frequency? It doesn't really matter because the cost is going to be the same. So we did it with the cheapest technology available.
Right. But one other thing, if your beamer's on the ground, a powerful laser beam passing through the atmosphere makes the atmosphere refract and you lose focus. That's not true of microwaves.
Probably not good for birds or airliners either.
No.
Yeah.
Right. So you'd really like to build a beamer in space.
Yeah. Right.
And use all that nice, cheap solar power that's available
Exactly.
to run the thing. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, it could be something you do when the solar power station of several gigawatts is in essentially at midnight or 6 a.m. when nobody needs the power.
Yeah.
You can use it to drive sails.
And you use it to drive sails all over the solar system, carrying make it the Pony Express.
I still want to get to some of those more exotic technologies, but let's go to the audience now and see what you folks would like to contribute to this discussion. Here comes the microphone right here. Hi, sir. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dan Schwartz. I'm Peter's brother. Jim, you said,
Hi.
yeah. Jim said that there would be two kinds of worlds that would be seen. One's uninhabited, and we would explore that. One is inhabited, and we would observe that. How realistic is that? How realistic is it that we would go all the way to the stars and simply observe?
Gentlemen?
Yeah, well, it depends upon whether you believe in the prime directive. If there's no civilization there, then I think what you do is landers that are unobtrusive and try to understand the botany, biology, and observe the. You can intrude, and then the question becomes whether we will interact at all. And I suspect we have no data about this, no information whatsoever about alien ecosystems. We probably won't interact because we'll have a different chemical basis, and I think the invasion of Mars, the War of the Worlds scenario, in which somehow our bacteria interact, is extremely remote. In fact, Paul Davies considers all of these possibilities in his wonderful piece in the book Starship Century, and thinks about not only the physical and biological, but also the ethical questions which you are in part raising.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant close for the book by a brilliant gentleman.
Yeah, it really is.
Another question. Hi, sir.
Yes.
What's your name?
Name's Ralph. Just a quick question. Is there real science to the idea of creating or manufacturing artificial wormholes to sort of leapfrog from...
Oh, you're taking us right into those exotic technologies.
Oh, okay.
Well,
we're going to get to that.
You can do the calculation, but the engineering is harder.
And they're not just laying around for us to grab, but Jim?
This is the sexy thing that everybody likes to talk about, but it's a bridge too far. That is, the energies required are essentially inconceivable to most people. Think of it this way: how much energy is converted? How much matter is converted into energy in a hydrogen bomb? It's on the order of the mass of the briefcase you carry around, right? What is the energy required under present understanding to produce a wormhole? It's on the order of the mass of Jupiter.
Yeah. Budget
Staggering
problems.
I think that's my answer.
Yeah, 100% conversion of the mass of Jupiter. That's impressive. Look, but you guys put it in the book. And so I want to bring up that example that I said blew my mind. And it came from a real physicist like you guys, John Kramer, University of Washington, who does not only takes a wormhole, but does this incredible thing with it where he takes one end of this conduit that sort of bypasses regular space, puts it in the Large Hadron Collider in Europe, and shoots it out near the speed of light to another star.
Well, I think it's a good idea, especially since the Large Hadron Collider doesn't seem to be finding anything after the Higgs boson.
Yeah, really. They ought to find something to do with it.
Yeah, it's lying around there.
But what about, and this was maybe the most interesting and fantastic aspect of it, you basically, according, I suppose, to the relativity equations, you have a time machine. You can take a look at this other world with a delay of only days, not years. How is that possible? It's in the math.
Special relativity. No, I remember when John told me this idea a decade ago. He laid it out, sketched out the equations. We were just having dinner. We'd finished up, and he covered the tablecloth in a pretty expensive restaurant with this notation. And he said, "What do you think about all this?" And I said, "John, I don't think you've had enough to drink. Have some more, John." Because first time you hear it, it just sounds crazy. But it's technically correct.
I want to hear your thoughts as well about the other major class of exotic Einstein bypassing
Wormholes,
technologies.
say?
Well, wormholes and then warp drive. Because there is this physicist who said, gee, warp bubbles, they have them in the Federation.
Yeah.
Is this a possibility?
Yes, we'll appeal to Paramount. First, wormholes. Wormholes were actually first constructed as a cosmological solution for a curved way of space-time by Einstein and Rosen. They were called Einstein-Rosen bridges until John Wheeler decided to call them wormholes. You have to curve space-time a great deal, and we don't have that budget. The only possibility is if the early universe created some and they're lying around. And so it's an asset you could find, and I've always liked that idea. In fact, we published some papers about how to detect them in the night sky. Okay, that's wormholes.
And wrote a novel about it, too.
Pardon?
Wrote a novel about it, he said.
Bob Forward did, yes, right.
Artifact.
Oh, I wrote a novel about it. Yes, I did.
And Robert Forward also wrote about
this. After a while, they kind of stack up on you. And then there's warp drive, which also requires an enormous energy budget. The guy who wrote the paper doesn't work in the field anymore, always a sign. But these are fun to think about, and they have employed a large number of science fiction writers, so I guess that's a good thing.
Let's turn back out to the audience here, and I think we have a question all the way in the back. Hi, sir.
Hi. I was listening to KPCC today talking about the government shutdown, something on the order of $60 billion a day to run the federal government. If you guys were given $60 billion tomorrow, where specifically would you point that for interstellar travel development?
Great question. You think you might be able to raise $60 billion off the book?
Well, NASA spends $19 billion a year, and so in what, 3 years you can get that much money. I would put it into beam sales because I think it's a very smart way to send a lot of stuff around the solar system for everything that you might want. And in fact, you could you could do a great deal with $60 billion. It's just amazing for such a small amount of money. Mm-hmm. What about you, Jim?
Well, I completely agree. I'm running a project now called Project Forward, named after my old friend Bob Forward, now deceased, that's trying to figure out what a 21st century sail system would be and how we could build up power beaming of power into an interstellar architecture, an interplanetary architecture followed by an interstellar probes over the next century or two. The key factor here is we talk about beaming energy and driving sails and other things. The key thing is that photons don't have any mass. It takes the big cost factor in space today is sending mass into orbit, but it doesn't cost anything to send photons into orbit because they have no mass. So you can beam power to something and get an energy in space and between points in space far more efficiently than you can move matter. And then you can use that energy to move the matter that matters, that is the payload itself in the form of sails.
Let me let you say more nice things about your late colleague, Robert Forward, because people used to say, well, all right, you have this sail and you get it up to a significant portion of the speed of light and it reaches another star. How the heck do you slow down to hang out by that star for a while? Didn't he figure this out?
Yep.
Yes, he figured out a way of segmenting the sail so that when you get to the stellar system in the distance, the laser or microwave or millimeter wave beam that drove you would provide a beam that would allow the large part of the sail to reflect the beam off onto the smaller part and decelerate the smaller part into the target system. That requires extremely accurate focusing, or pointing and tracking of that beam, 3 orders of magnitude better than we can do today, which, by the way, is 3 orders of magnitude more than we could do at the beginning of the 20th century. So it's conceivable you could do that, but the pointing accuracy is the driving factor in being able to do such matters. There's another method proposed a long time ago and really quantified by Bob Zubrin, which is called the mag sail, it uses an interaction between a magnetic loop through which you drive a current and the magnetic field of the galaxy to do deceleration as you approach the star, and that is a viable approach as well. We're trying to sort out the relative challenges of these approaches right now, because that is the key problem of sails is deceleration.
Yeah. Bob Forward actually invented the field of interstellar acrobatics.
And Robert Zubrin, by the way, of the Mars Society, is another one of the contributors to Starship Century, the book. I do want to go back out to the audience as we get close to the end of our time here, but I also want to put Lou Friedman, Emeritus Executive Director of the Planetary Society, the man who wrote the book on solar sailing, a serious engineering consideration of that technology, to see if, Lou, you would like to provide any comment on what you've heard, particularly on the potential that sails offer.
Well, I did write a book called Solar Sails and Interstellar Travel, and it has the most profound thing to say about this subject that anyone can say. And those are 3 words: space is big. And I'm in awe of these ideas that Jim and Greg and David Brin were talking about. They really can see this whole field in a way that I'm kind of trying to concentrate on just taking small steps exiting the solar system. I think we can advance sails to learn more about all these techniques, try all these things, do experiments now in the next few decades that'll take us there, and maybe have some interesting destinations along the way outside the solar system. Very close, only hundreds of AUs away instead of 250,000 AU, which is the nearest star.
How far out is Voyager now? 100?
Voyager is nowhere. It's only 120 AU.
Yeah, and it was only going to go to the outer planets. And we got all this for free.
And Lou, you call these interstellar precursors?
Interstellar precursors. I think it's something I do think that interstellar travel is very hard and very far away, maybe centuries. I'm not optimistic about 1 century from now. No. But I do think we can do things now that get us a lot smarter, and maybe I'm wrong then.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out that if you invert this problem, this makes, if interstellar can be done at a scale of centuries by dumb primates fresh out of Africa like us, think of what this does to the whole Fermi problem again. If we can do it, where the hell?
Where is everybody?
What is it?
Enrico Fermi, sitting at lunch one day, said to his colleagues, if the galaxy is full of intelligent civilizations, why haven't we heard from them? Where is everybody?
Yeah. My theory is that we live in Jersey and the smart people are in Manhattan.
That must sound good to Lou, who's a New Yorker. Yeah. Jim, you wanted to get in on this.
Well, we're in the outskirts of the galaxy. Yeah. But it is, the Fermi paradox is a real paradox because any explanation you could think of has to apply to everything, every civilization that could have visited us or interacted with us. And the problem is, it's reasonable to say there are a lot of those, but we have seen no evidence of any of those. The thing I would favor is there are really 2 explanations that I favor. First, there aren't any, and that's very sobering. And that would be something we don't understand according to what we know now. The second is there's a prohibition against contacting us.
Yeah.
That's the zoo hypothesis. And that's very sobering, too.
Yeah. Think of the implications of that first one, though. It means that we're the first intelligent life in the galaxy with technological capability, and that places an even greater burden upon ourselves, for we stand for all intelligent life. If oak trees are ever going to grow on Mars, we got to get them there. And the ditto for the rest of the galaxy.
And can I just say, if the second scenario is the correct one, and the Vulcans are monitoring this right now, please don't wait until we develop warp drive. Come on down. We're friendly. Free Wi-Fi. Let's see if we can get in a couple more questions before we finish up the evening. Right there, sir. Hi. Introduce yourself.
I'm Don Trask. I just live up the road a piece here. What I'm interested in is some estimate of the time lag between when you get there and when you have a technological base, that begins to approach what you have now. I mean, I can see I can get the information there, but how long does it take before you have a real civilization that can carry forward at about the level we are or will be at the time?
Oh, maybe 1,000 years. It's just a matter of increasing your population because you've got all the information. I mean, it's not like we have to reinvent the typewriter. So you could very quickly, well, look at the American experience. How long did it take those who first colonized, which happened a century after Columbus, to become an independent nation?
Long time.
300 years.
Jim? I don't know.
Well, that's a reasonable time scale. Of course, I think that the time scale shortens as the technology improves. And we could now, say, develop and move into Antarctica in a very short time compared to what it took a century ago, because we have much better technologies. We have, well, I can list them. So it's likely that time scale to build a colony up to where it can expand and produce a new colony will be shorter and shorter as time goes on, because the tech base increases with time, assuming that the resource base exists on the new world, which is the reason you would go there.
I want to get one more question from the audience before we have maybe just a little closing question that I have for the Benfords. Yes, sir. Hi.
Hi, my name's Doug Sievers. I was curious, for the light sail, once you get it there, how would you return anything back?
That is a challenge, isn't
300 years. You build another civilization, but you probably what you want is information. I mean, we're not looking to export oil from Alpha Centauri. So it's information is both cheaper to move, and it's, I think, more interesting because it's culture.
Mm-hmm.
Lou Friedman says on this week's Planetary Radio that, even if you could only transmit a bit a second, that's not bad. We got lots of seconds.
Well, some of us do.
All right. We're pretty much at the end of our time here. We're coming up on 8:30 Pacific time. Gentlemen, I just want to close with this and hear from both of you. You've devoted a great deal of thought and a lot of work to this field, which the realization of which is probably still a long ways out there. Why? Why have you devoted so much of your lives and thought to this topic of, making us an interstellar species? Greg?
The expansion of human horizons. You might as well ask, why did the founding fathers start the United States? Because they wanted to see new ideas afoot in the world.
Jim?
I would say, but basically because, as Greg said earlier, we are the descendants of those early primates who chose to look over the next hill. But because we won't survive here indefinitely, and because, as Mallory said about Everest, because they're there.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us for an absolutely wonderful and enjoyable conversation. Please.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Here is their new book, Starship Century, Toward the Grandest Horizon, edited by our guests tonight, James Benford and Gregory Benford. And here we have, I want to make sure I got the URL correct. If you go to starshipcentury.com, not only can you learn more about and purchase the book, but there is much, much more there, many resources, and there are lots of resources in the back of this book, including information about those 5 organizations that Jim talked about, all of which now have dedicated so much to this dream of interstellar flight, making humanity an interstellar species. And again, all the proceeds from sales of the book will go to interstellar exploration research. I want to, once again, as I always do, thank the great, great people here at the Crawford Family Forum. I also want to tell you, I don't remember which of you it was. I think, Jim, it was you. No, Greg, was in your slides talking about that technology of 3D printing.
Yeah.
Well, next month, probably late in October, keep an eye on scpr.org and look at the upcoming events here in the Crawford Family Forum. You are sure to find many events that you would enjoy attending, but pretty soon we'll be setting the date for the next one in the next series, and that's going to be about biofabrication, this possibility that maybe someday, we're going to be, hopefully before interstellar flight, we may be able to print out your new heart or liver from a 3D printer like the kinds that might someday build interstellar spacecraft. Biofabrication, that's what we'll pick up next in the next series. Again, my thanks to all the good folks here at the Crawford Family Forum and Southern California Public Radio, to you here in the room, and to all of you who joined us on the webcast this evening. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you again. Please keep looking forward. Good night.